Welcome to Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast with Alexia Leachman, the weekly 9-month podcast to help parents-to-be look forward to their fear-free childbirth. Alexia is a pregnancy and head trash clearance coach and the author of Fear-Free Childbirth, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy and a Positive, Pain-Free Birth. As a mum who's had 2 fear-free and pain-free births, Alexia wants to share with you how she overcame her pregnancy and childbirth fears so that you can look forward to having a fear-free birth too. Over the 9-month life of this podcast, Alexia will be sharing some real-life stories from mums and dads, insights into the latest childbirth research, inspiring tales from birth professionals, and some tips and techniques for clearing your fears and stresses. If you would like to receive a free chapter from her book, then head over to fearfreechildbirth.com, where you can also sign up for her email series, How to Have a Stress-Free Pregnancy. But now, it's time for the show.
Hello and welcome back to the Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast. This is me, your host, Alexia Leachman. Thank you so much for joining me. Now, on today's show, something a little bit different. Today, I've got a guest on who's going to share with me her positive birth story. Now, one thing that I feel really passionate about is the fact that we are overwhelmed with stuff in the media that really portrays birth as a negative experience. And there are horror stories left, right and centre that you hear from other women, but also you see stuff on TV and in the movies and it's always drama, it's always really quite scary. So, you know, one thing that I think that we can help to try and mitigate against this is put out some of the good stuff, some of the positive stories, some of the magical stories and some of the experiences that women have that can show us that birth can be enjoyable, can be magical, can be wonderful, because it so often is. But unfortunately, we just don't hear those stories. So if you don't want to hear a positive birth story, then I'm afraid you're in the wrong place. So go and find somewhere else to go and listen to the horror stories. This today is where you're going to find a beautiful positive story. In fact, there's 2 beautiful birth experiences. My guest today is Jennifer Nesbitt-Holt, and Jennifer is a fellow podcaster. That's how I met her. She's got a wonderful podcast called The Sound of Your Significance, but that's not the reason I got her on the show. The reason she's on the show is to share her positive birth story. In fact, she's got 2 positive birth stories to share. So that is why I've got her on, because the great thing that Jennifer is able to share with us during our chat is really to do with how she prepared for her births and what she did to enable her to have these positive birth experiences. So there's lots that she's going to share with us in terms of what she did, but we're also going to find out more about how they unfolded for her. And they were both very different as well, and how they were different. So I hope that you get a lot of value out of listening to somebody else sharing their positive birth experience. And more importantly, what I really want you to get from this, especially if you're currently pregnant and looking, you know, facing your birth that's going to be coming up for you in the very near future, then I want to inspire you that this is that it is possible to have a positive experience. And what I want to create here is a place that we can share positive birth stories, so that you've got somewhere to come to really sort of lock yourself in and prepare yourself for that fear-free birth experience, because there's just too much negative information out there that really is very damaging. And so I want this podcast and the little world that I'm creating. I've got a Facebook group, so you can come and find us on Facebook at the Fear-Free Childbirth page. So come and like the page. It's very, very young and baby-like at the moment, but please do come and show your support. We've got a page that's growing over there, and really to create a space for mums to come and hear positive experiences, because really that's one of the best ways to get rid of the fear and prepare for a fear-free birth. Now, I'm going to stop talking right now and just hand over to the time that I spoke to Jennifer, because she really is an absolute delight to listen to. She's got a brilliant accent, or at least I love her accent as a Brit, and she's got some wonderful, wonderful things to share. And also there's a little bit of bonus content right at the end of the show, because she's got a really useful thing to share that is she thinks is really, really super useful for new mums as well as pregnant mums to be. So listen out for the little bit of bonus stuff right at the end of the interview as well. I hope you enjoy. See you on the other side. Hello, Jennifer, and welcome to the Fear-Free Childbirth Podcast.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Well, before we dive in and talk about your pregnancy journey and your lovely births, would you mind just sort of telling the listeners a little bit about yourself before we start?
Yeah, I live in Austin, Texas in the United States, and I am the mother of a beautiful 3-year-old and 8-year-old boy, and I'm a wife and an entrepreneur and artist, and I'm everything in one, as most of us women probably are.
Yeah, sounds familiar. And I just, before we sort of dive in and talk about births, but like the first thing I really want to ask you is when you first found out that you were pregnant, how was that for you? What was that like?
Well, I mean, with my son, it was a journey for us trying to get pregnant. And it was a very interesting experience because, of course, at that time, my husband and I had really, really wanted to get pregnant, and in that journey had hit some walls, and we're going through a lot of tests and trying to figure out, well, why aren't we getting pregnant? So he was, my son, his name is Hollis, he was just already a light in my eye, and I felt very connected and knew, I was like, I'm supposed to have a little boy. Well, my husband had some health issues, and so we backed off from trying, and it's so interesting that when you back off and release the pressure of it all, that's when we got pregnant. So I was, of course, blissful, and at the time, I was painting quite a bit and starting my journey into entrepreneurship, and I was teaching yoga at the same time, and so it was beautiful the way it all happened, during that particular time in my life. So I had a lot of ways to have outlets to support me.
And so was your first pregnancy, was it a joyful experience throughout all of that, or did you suffer with symptoms and, I don't know, like some of the pregnancy stuff that some people really get frustrated by, or how was it for you?
Yeah, one thing that happened to me, and interestingly enough, happened with both my pregnancies, that I the doctors half the time don't know what they're talking about. And, they would try to say, well, your conception date is this. And I'm like, no, I know it was this. But I bled into my second trimester with both of my children, which, of course, was very stressful. I had had a miscarriage years ago, and so that was on, the forefront of my mind, and it brought about, but I want to say this, it brought about fear, definitely in my first pregnancy, but I, at that time, recognized the fear and sourced out people to help me. I worked with a doula from almost the beginning of my pregnancy and into 6 weeks after I gave birth.
Oh, wow.
So I had this amazing experience in this support system. So I was able to kind of have her hold my hand and work through it through guided meditation, breath work, yoga, of course. I think the natural first-time mama pregnancy, you don't know what the heck is going on. And, I was sick for like 16 weeks. And, I think the one thing is you have all these people telling you, here's what it should be like. And it's never what it should be like. It's always just what it is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think by the time my second pregnancy rolled around, it was interesting. I had the same symptoms. I had the bleeding. I had the sickness. And really by that time, it was like, I know what's going on. This is my body. And I felt like, okay, nothing's wrong. This is just me.
And you said that you work with a doula, and that's quite a long time to be working with a doula. So how, because in my mind, I guess a doula you get involved with the doula maybe leading up to the birth, but it sounded like you were working, you had a very long relationship with your doula. So how was she supporting you for all that period? What were you doing with her?
The interesting, this is a service that I wish was accessible to so many people, and it is really truly hard to find someone who does this sort of doula work. And we approached it in a Ayurvedic aspect of diet. The particular meditations and yoga work that I was doing was all centered around Kundalini yoga, which is not my trained style of yoga. I'm a Hatha trained teacher, but it was a lot of really getting into the body, doing a lot of work around the spine. And she just was, we would have meetings every few weeks. And a lot of it too, honestly, Alexia, it just came to be, she was a shoulder to either cry on or to have someone listen to me and my fears. Yeah, it's an amazing experience. And I want to say this too, she almost prepared me so well that I didn't need anybody the second time.
Wow. That's a good doula.
Yeah.
Amazing. So now leading up to the birth, leading up to the birth, obviously as a first mum, how are you feeling sort of coming up to that childbirth moment? What was it like? Were you early? Were you late? How was your due date? I mean, tell me a little bit about that lead up to the birth. You're laughing.
I am, because it's so funny, the things you forget, and it wasn't until you asked me that question, was I early, was I late? Again, both my kids, I went to 43 weeks pregnant. They don't want to leave their mama's belly.
Well, I'm not surprised, like lovely yoga going on.
Yeah, and so I think it was just this, I remember with my son, I remember reaching that point of, come on already, and that was when I was actually due, and when he was supposed to be there. And I went through this push-pull struggle. It was probably more mental and ego-based than anything, but it was definitely frustrating that I couldn't control it, and then my husband and I, just kind of like the way we got pregnant, we let it go. We just let it go. And so he gestated, another 2.5 weeks. And
the longest 2 weeks in your life, I'm sure.
And I remember we were watching The Office with Ricky Gervais. And I go, I'm going to go to the bathroom. And it's 43 weeks late, and my water broke. So Ricky Gervais will always be there in my my labor experience.
Fantastic. I'm sure he'd love to know that.
He probably would.
So your waters broke in the middle of watching The Office. Yes. So were you doing anything else to try and bring on labour at that point, or had you just let go completely and you weren't doing anything? Well, I'm thinking like raspberry leaf tea or pineapple, or I don't know.
Yeah. My husband he had read online that eggplant parmesan was the trick.
Oh, really? I've not heard that one.
But no, that was like 2 weeks before I gave birth.
Okay. That's why we've not heard about it.
Right. But no, I was doing the raspberry, the red leaf tea, hibiscus tea. I was doing the primrose oil massage. We, of course, were having intercourse, which was not, I did not want to do that. And then, just a lot of mindset exercises. And it was at that time, I wasn't really aware of the hypnobirthing, but in looking back, think that some of the yoga had truly prepared me for a similar experience.
So in terms of the prep then that you did for your first birth was very much to do with the yoga, I guess, from what you're saying. Is that right?
It is. And, moving forward a little bit, when I was trained as I was already trained as a certified prenatal yoga teacher when I was pregnant with my son, but getting, deeper into my experience after becoming a mother, of course, gave me new insight. And I realized how powerful some of the exercises were where we would hold, say, our arms in a V position, with our fingers bent, our thumbs in the air, and I would have pregnant women do that, doing a rapid breath called breath of fire, which this is a Kundalini exercise. So you're seated on the floor, you have your arms raised, your thumbs are pointing in towards each other, and you're doing this rapid, pumping your belly and your navel point. And to have women do that or similar exercises for 3 minutes at a time, the goal is to simulate, look, a contraction's only going to be 2 minutes at most, and that's in early labor. So if you can find these ways to get into a mindset of this is very uncomfortable, but I've got to keep doing it early on, the contractions aren't painful. They're intense. But I never would go to say they were painful. And I know some women might disagree with me on that. I have a pretty high pain tolerance, but...
No, I would agree with you. I wouldn't call mine... In my first birth, I think I would call them yes, intense, definitely intense. I think in the second one, I wouldn't even call them intense. It was incredible. So I totally, I understand what you mean when you say that you think that they're intense and not painful.
And I don't know if you've talked to other women who have said this, and I don't want anyone confusing this with pleasure. If women, of course, women were always asking me, first-time moms, what's it like? What's a contraction like? And you try to ease these women's minds. And I would say, I never felt it was painful, but I felt it was intense. So the best way to describe it, and tell me if you agree, is it's like an orgasm times 100.
Don't know about an orgasm, but it's really hard to try and explain how I would.
It is.
It is really, really intense. Is the best way. It's like and just exhausting sometimes. It's that kind of have I got it in me kind of intensity, as opposed to a physical. No, of course it's physical, but it's a really difficult one to describe. But certainly, I know that where I was noticing anything that might be resembling pain really is just at the bottom of my back, and I just really appreciated having massage in the lower back area, and the minute I had touch there it just went, and so I just needed to I was like, get over here, massage the back. and then once it was, I was like, oh, happy again, fine, and that's how it was for me. But yeah.
It's good to have massage minions in your birthing corner.
That and the grapes. More grapes, please.
Yes.
I had grapes. They're little pockets of juice that are just perfect. Rather than holding a glass or, that kind of thing. Grapes are perfect as well, I found. Yep. Anyway, back to your... So so you were late, 43 weeks, and then how did it all unfold then? You were watching The Office, and then what happened?
Had this, what was interesting, what was going on here too, is we were in the middle of an ice storm.
Oh my goodness. And,
Texans don't know how to deal with anything that is other than sun. So, we were in the midst of that, and and I should back up. My son wasn't at home. We chose to do it at a birthing center. And that was really a decision that made my husband feel safer. It took a lot of convincing for him to not have the baby in the hospital. And I felt very adamant about that, which was my choice. But he ended up kind of meeting me halfway, and then we decided to have Hollis in a birthing center, which was very much like having him at home, except the car ride. Yeah. And an ice storm. And I remember being on my hands and knees in the back of our car, and the doula doing just what you said, was massaging my back. I remember her singing to me, and I felt like I was on my hands and knees, and I felt like my husband was driving at Mach 2. Like, and later he goes, no, I was driving only like 40 miles an hour on the freeway. And I'm like, oh my God, I felt like I was being pushed around everywhere. So by the time we arrived, and, in a birthing center, we had the bed, we had the tub, we had the shower, everything was right there. It was just like birthing in your own room. The experience from start to finish was 7 hours.
Nice.
Yeah, it was. It was a very positive birth experience. Don't get me wrong, but I really believe now, looking back, that transition in the car may have contributed to my son shifting a little, and I had back labor really bad. So it turned out that I ended up feeling like I needed to push for 4 of those hours.
Oh my goodness.
But I love the human body, especially the female body, because it's, all of our hormones take over, and I remember it and yet don't remember it, so to speak. The pain and the intensity, and really the pain, like you said, was the back. It had nothing to do with the birth. Nothing to do with the birth, right? That was a silly comment. But, and I would say that was what was really different with my first pregnancy. It was kind of like, here's a freight train. And I was just like in such a zone that I even kind of blocked myself from some of those stages. Whereas my daughter I was completely cognizant of every single thing going on around me. And
why is the difference between the two, do you think? What was the reason that you were so cognizant of the second then?
Before we started recording, we had shared a little bit, and you had talked about like that dialogue you had with your baby. And it was a similar thing with her. It was talking to her about, look, I want to have you during the day.
This is how it's going to roll, honey.
It is. And I got kind of strict with her towards the end, because I'm like, look, you're at 43 weeks again. Let's be done. And I had a very good intuitive conception of what my children were like in utero. And I can't even explain that, but who I saw them to be when they were in my belly is who they very much are. And I just had to kind of talk to her just like the 3-year-old stubborn little willful child she is now. And I was like, you gotta come during the day. I need that daylight during this labor. I didn't know why, but I knew I needed that. I just knew I needed it. And I told her, I want it to be smooth but short, because I think in the second pregnancy, I kept thinking about the 4 hours of pushing. So honestly, in the second pregnancy, I had to work through some of the fear of already knowing it could be like that.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's common in second pregnancies, but almost more anxiety came up in the second versus the first, because I didn't know what was going on in the first.
Yeah, ignorance is bliss.
It is blissful. But yeah, so I think also just kind of the way I moved through it all with her during that morning and that day. I had a really interesting experience with her too that I didn't with my son, and that was I had prodromal labor, which is labor that's false, but it starts a few days ahead of time. And so I spent 4 nights before I actually went into actual labor with her, thinking I was in labor every single night.
Goodness.
I know.
Was that as hardcore as it sounds?
Yes and no. And honestly, my husband slept through most of it, but when I would push him awake, I would time them just to make sure. I think the worst part about it was the sleep, not getting the sleep.
Yeah. And so how long was that second birth then compared to your first?
It was 5 hours.
Wow.
She listened.
Good girl.
I know.
And so was that a home birth or was that in a birthing centre?
That was a home birth, yeah.
Okay. And so did you have a pool? What was the plan for at home? Did you have a plan for maybe staying in the bedroom or having a pool or something? Part of the reason too, logistically, that I kept rationalizing in my mind as to have her during the day was my son could be at school. My mom could drive in from out of town to help if needed. And so with that, my plan, it was going to happen, damn it, was I have the whole house I had 2 midwives, and we had
Deb Likens, the photographer there, filming the whole start to finish. And so I used the whole house. And I think because of my son's labor, I had tried water. I was very adamant about using the tub with him. It didn't work out. So I kind of threw my hands in the air on, let's not do it. You know, let's just not even bother with it, because we had a tub and we had a shower. So I didn't want to get caught up on too many details.
And so how was that second birth then? Was that, you know, in terms of maybe the intensity or the contractions, or how did all that feel? You said you're more cognizant, so what was that one like for you?
It was so, you know, honestly, it was better because I was so much aware, and we'd be talking and laughing, and then I'd put my finger in the air, like, contraction coming, and then I'd go into the primal moan space, you know, and then I'd be done, and then I'd be, okay, so what I was saying was, so we had a lot of laughter that day, and, you know, when it got intense, but what was such a gift for me was not having that 4 hours of pushing, and having, what amazed me is I could feel the cervix completely opening to kind of invite her into the world. Yeah. You know, just this, I can't, you know, it's hard to explain. So hard to explain.
Wow. And so when did you know with your two what they were, whether they were boys or girls, or was it a surprise for any of those?
We did. And I don't know, maybe it's the type A personality in me, but I was like, I just would like to know. You know, because I think part of it for me was the bonding with them ahead of time. And really wanting to set myself into this space of, I don't know how to explain that, but it was very important to me to know.
And you mentioned earlier on that you didn't do hypnobirthing for your first, but for your second. Is that right?
No, I didn't even do it for the second.
Oh, didn't you? So you didn't. So what? So you had this amazing doula the first time round that prepared you so well. Did you use a doula in the same way for your second birth, or did you just kind of coast on in, no prep required? I would say that's more accurate. And I had two midwives, which was interesting. They were two partners, and they both attended the birth. And I also had, you know, Deb was there, who was the photographer, but she's a friend of mine, and she had 3 home births. And so it was such a tight support system that I knew I was going to have. And my husband also knew more of what to expect, you know. So I didn't do much planning. And, you know, in the phase that I was at in my life too, I didn't feel like I needed it. So in terms of where your head was at, it sounds like you were in a really good place and in a very confident place by the sounds of it. Like, you know, I can do this. I've got the support I need, and I'm prepared. Is that how it was for you?
It was.
And how do you think, you know, and there are so many women that aren't in that place, what would you suggest to them to sort of help them to get to that place? It's such a loaded question, but yet an easy one to answer, and that you have to find ways to forgive yourself for that. This is a journey that is your own, and that listening to other people's stories is powerful, but to surround yourself with the positive and not the negative. And that was big for me in both my pregnancies. The minute someone started, I felt confident saying, you know, I really don't want to hear a negative birth story. Yeah.
And people are very disrespectful about that, and they feel like, well, it's unwarranted advice is what a lot of pregnant women get. And I found that to be true. Like, people just walk up to you in the grocery store and start talking to you, and you're like, what?
Or touching your belly, and you're like, hello.
Right. So I think there's this, and what I meant about like forgiving yourself is it's okay to have a plan, and it's okay to be prepared, but you've got to be able to let that go when needed, because even with our intentions, it's not always going to be like it was for my second child that she gifted me with coming during the day. You know, it might not be that way, because there's not just you involved, it's the baby and it's the body. And this might be kind of a long answer to that, but learning to let go and say that it's okay. And so the sooner you start doing exercises around that in pregnancy, the easier your birth is. And, you know, as kind of a side comment to that is pregnancy, especially for first-time mothers, and it's pretty common just from me teaching prenatal yoga and also talking to postpartum mamas after, is that, oh my gosh, I lost my thought. Mama brain. Holy cow, what was I talking about? We were talking about
what's common for first-time mums, what they're going through in terms of the preparation or the mental place they're in.
Okay, just leave that on air, because people need to know that that's what happens after you have.
It happens to me all the time.
How could I forget this? It's very important to get over your shit with your parents, your own childhood. And I think we come into a place like, I'm going to do it this way, and it's got to be this way because I felt like my parents didn't do it right and this way. And, you know, I don't know. It's an opportunity to learn, to relearn, and to also let go.
Yeah. Absolutely. So you think that kind of work needs to start as early in your pregnancy as possible? Is that what you're suggesting?
Absolutely. But if you get to it later, it's never too late to start.
Well, no, exactly. Better late than never. That's the thing. Absolutely. My goodness, well, that's just, I'm just conscious of time, and you know, you just shared some wonderful stories. Is there anything else that you know, for a new mum listening who's just heard 2 wonderful birth stories, is there anything else, you know, apart from letting go of your shit, basically, to paraphrase what you said earlier, is there anything else that you would suggest?
Yes.
Or that you think is really good for, you know, anything that, I mean, you mentioned a doula. It sounds like, you know, you think a doula is really worth having as well. Is there anything else?
I mean, I think having that support system of people who do not question your choices and support you completely, you know, find those people and surround yourself with them, and don't go at this alone. I think, you know, primally speaking and evolutionarily speaking, we as women were meant to do this together, you know, in the village, and to have the additional support. So I think also aligning yourself with those people during your pregnancy and having them move into motherhood with you is so important, because you still need that support system after.
And that reminds me, actually, because I remember you told me once that you had a doula after you'd given birth as well. You called it the lying in period, I think.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
It's a beautiful, some people call it lotus birth. We chose, there's some very controversial things around lotus birth, and opinions, but typically the lying in period with a lotus birth is where you actually let the placenta be on you and by you and fall off on its own. We chose not to do that.
Okay.
But yeah, I know it's a very radical hippie, but we took the aspects of the lying in period that we resonated with, and that was, you know, to have the support. And she was the Ayurvedic perspective comes in when she was cooking specific foods for me to help my uterus heal, and also to help with the balancing of hormones and the certain teas I was drinking, and certain massage techniques. And we did this for 6 weeks. Now, she was there for the first 2 weeks almost every single day, and then she started slowly backing off, which for a new-time mother was really, it was nice. It was gentle, because had I just gone home And, if you're coming home from a hospital, it's like, here's this baby. Which, you don't know what to do. You don't. And then you're sleep deprived.
Yeah. It's hardcore, that is, that first
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I got to lie in bed with my son for 6 weeks.
Lovely.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's amazing that you were able to have that kind of support around you and so that you could really just devote your time and energy of just really connecting and bonding with him.
It was so important to me. And who he is just, it's still kind of how our connection is. We love our snuggle time.
Now, the one thing I wanted to ask you about your two little ones as well, it sounds like you didn't mention it, but I'm presuming that from what you said that your births were natural births. There was no sort of medicalisation involved. Because we didn't really talk about that bit. Is that how it was?
Correct. Yes. There was no intervention.
And so one thing that I hear quite a bit is that, babies born naturally, they're going to breastfeed more easily. They're probably going to be, sleep better and be calmer and cry less and all that kind of stuff. I'm just curious as to whether you've experienced, what was your experience with your two little ones in there when they were little babies,
Honestly, that sounds like a generic statement to me, and that my son didn't sleep. He did in the beginning. Yeah. He did definitely in the beginning. But he had reflux really bad. And then my daughter was the complete opposite. We had trouble breastfeeding, and I had to have a lot of support to help get her to latch on. And then, but yet she slept very well. So it's, it's hard. It's hard to say. I think overall, the comfort level of the child is definitely better, because like I said, I had friends that would be out in these huge shopping areas when their kid was 4 days old, and I'm thinking, the external stimuli that they're feeling, it's overwhelming. To come from the womb out into like this bright light, and but that's my opinion. Everybody has to do what they feel is right for their lifestyle, but yeah, I don't know. I don't know if I would agree that that's just true for everyone.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jennifer, for sharing. It's just been wonderful, wonderful chatting to you about this. A lot of people I'm sure are going to want to find out, maybe they want to find out a little bit more about, what you do. And is there anything, because you have a podcast too, that's how you met, isn't it, through the podcasting community. Do you want to just maybe share what your podcast is with the listeners?
Sure. The podcast is called The Sound of Your Significance. And I am a certified sound healer. And the original intention for the show was to go and dive into the science of sound. And really, it's morphed into talking to individuals, worldwide about how to live in high vibration and be successful. And it's been such a great journey to meet, I'm sure you can agree, to just meet all these wonderful people all over the world and get to hear these, just powerful, inspiring stories. And because, that's my mission, is to elevate the world. Who doesn't want to do that, right? But most of the time I'm on the show, I'm talking with leaders who have a following, because it's the people that are at the top that have so much influence, and we want to keep those people energetically in line, because they're touching so many lives at once. So, but yeah, and that's The Sound of Your Significance. And then my website is jennifernesbittholt.com.
Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that, because I'm sure, certainly for the UK people listening, the Brits, your accent is gorgeous.
Oh, thank you.
And I'd certainly be up for listening to a podcast where I can listen to this lovely accent in such a, delightful. So I'm sure there's going to be a few people checking out your podcast to listen to that, because it sounds absolutely fascinating. And I know when I listened to it, I've loved it. So certainly go and check out Jennifer's podcast. So thank you so much, Jennifer, for joining me on the Fear Free Childbirth podcast. I really appreciate you sharing your story and hopefully inspiring lots of women about the possibilities of a positive birth experience.
I loved being here. Thank you for letting me share my story.
My pleasure, Jennifer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, wasn't Jennifer utterly fabulous? I'm sure you enjoyed listening to her as much as I enjoyed chatting to her. Now, as Jennifer touched on at the end of the chat, she's got her own podcast. And then the thing is, when we finished recording, she started telling me about this fantastic recording that she's created to help bring about calm. And I said, well, I need to get you back on the show. Quickly, let's record this and let's just do this, because I knew she had to go really, really quickly. And then I had a massive tech fail. So unfortunately, I didn't get the opportunity to chat to Jennifer about this thing that she's got. But what she did do for me instead, which was brilliant, is she sent me a little snippet of her explaining all about this recording. So I'm just going to play that in just a moment. But basically, if you go to her website, you can get this CD that will enable you to feel a lot calmer and is great for pregnant mums, but also new mums. So here is Jennifer just telling us all about that.
One of the things I would recommend is turning to sound to help ground you during your pregnancy. I have formulated an amazing audio CD with the Tibetan bowls called Currents of Curiosity and Courage that I have found with several of my clients, students, that it is so helpful in the midst of things feeling overwhelming in their life. And also personally, having used these sorts of complex frequencies and sounds during my children's infancy and having them listen to them to help find more of that peaceful, pleasant place. So thank you again for having me on the show, and you can download that CD actually from iTunes or Amazon or buy it directly off my site. Again, that's Currents of Curiosity and Courage.
So there you have it. Now, I'm going to include all links and information so you can get hold of that CD if you want to in the show notes for today's episode, as well as links to Jennifer's podcast, Sound of Your Significance, which you can find on iTunes. So I hope that today has been a really useful episode for you to hear and has inspired you that it is possible to have an enjoyable, positive birth experience, but more importantly, what you can do to help make that happen, to help make that more likely for you to experience something as wonderful as and magical as that. So until next time, bye for now.
Thank you for tuning in. You've just been listening to Alexia Leachman from the Fear-Free Childbirth podcast. If you enjoyed the show, she'd really love it if you left a review on iTunes or Stitcher or shared it with a friend. And don't forget, to get a free chapter from her book, head over to fearfreechildbirth.com to get your copy, as well as finding other episodes in this podcast and more about how Alexia can help you with pregnancy and birth preparation coaching. Until next time.